Back in 1965, I was a newlywed. My honeymoon was organised by my husband to a place called Osmington in the county of Dorset, England. As we drove down the narrow country lanes, we stopped at a horse park and rescue where I got to walk a Suffolk Punch horse around the paddock. Afterwards we told the farmhand where we were staying and he gave us directions. We stayed at a pub called the Smuggler's Inn. The location was so rural there were no power lines. It was run on a propane generator. As we entered, I could see a bar and a few dining tables. Behind the tables was an enclosed fireplace. To either side were stairs leading to the bedrooms. We only just got our suitcases up the stairs. It was so narrow. As we got to the top of the stairs, we could see a four-poster bed. There was also a small fireplace. I unpacked the suitcases while my husband lit the fire. After the fire was set, we went to get some supper before bed. We thanked the landlord for the food and headed up the narrow stairs back to our room. As I entered, I noticed the posts on the bed had carvings of gargoyles. With the open fire, they looked scary. I then remembered that they were for protection from evil spirits. About 3 hours had passed when I was awoken from my slumber. In the darkness of the room, I could hear a shuffling sound. I tried to wake my husband, but he would not wake. Then the shuffling sound stopped. I decided that the sound must have been my imagination and eventually drifted back off to sleep. The next day, my husband and I decided to go on a coastal walk. The walkways along the coast were narrow and close to the edge of the cliffs. As we walked along, the heel of my shoe broke off and I felt myself falling forwards. My husband had grabbed the corner of my dress and pulled me to safety. The dress was torn along the back. It looked like I had been attacked. The sun was on the horizon and it was time to head back. On arrival at the inn, we got some strange looks at the sign of my torn dress, until we explained what had happened. I asked for a needle and cotton. I didn't have many good dresses and wanted to repair it. The innkeeper went to ask his wife for the items. As I sat sewing on the bed in our room, I noticed some stains on the wooden floor that looked like blood. They were leading from the door to the bed, and I wondered why I hadn't noticed them before. After our evening meal, we returned to our room and soon fell into a deep sleep. The time was 10 p.m, and after about 3 hours sleep, I was awoken again to the sound of shuffling. I slowly opened my eyes and froze at the sight of a woman dressed in black standing at the side of the bed. She was in a long cloak with a bonnet upon her head. She was holding her side, and I looked down to see blood running through her fingers. She looked at me with wide, fearful eyes, then turned back and walked 5 paces before falling to the ground and disappearing. I woke my husband and told him what I saw. In the morning he asked the innkeeper if we could swap our room. He informed us that they were full to capacity and asked why. I told him of the night's events. The innkeeper then told us a story. He told us back in 1845 the innkeeper was a woman called Kate Beacons. She had connections to pirates who smuggled merchandise from the cove below. They would lure passing ships onto the rocky outcrops using lamps on foggy nights. There was a secret tunnel that led from the cove up to the Smuggler's Inn. But on one fateful night, there was a difference of opinion on the amount that should be shared between the pirates. They gave her a knife in the side for her troubles. She managed to get away and struggled back to the inn, where she later succumbed to her injuries and died in the very room where we were staying. The innkeeper convinced us to stay by giving us our last day for free, and on our last day we visited the cove where the woman in black had received her fatal wounds. I was a 17-year-old job seeker and there was no vacancies available locally. There was an opportunity, but it was far away. North Sea Oil needed people that were willing to work on an oil rig for 6 months at a time. I sent an application and got a reply. The interview was in Scotland. I had to travel to Aberdeen. There were many vacancies available. I decided to be a trainee chef. You were required to feed 228 crew 3 times a day. The oil rig was basically a floating city. 1 week before my interview, I was tired from all the preparations. I headed towards my bedroom to get some sleep. I turned off my light and laid down to rest. Eventually, I got to sleep. Then about 2.5 hours had passed when I could smell smoke. It reminded me of my late granddad's cigars. I felt restless and headed downstairs to the front room. The smell of cigar smoke was getting stronger. I looked at the clock on my wall. It was 12:35 a.m. The night was very hot. The cigar smell started to disappear. I returned to my room to lay down to rest. 1 hour had passed and I heard a massive explosion. I switched my light on, but nobody else in the house was stirred. How could everyone still be asleep after a noise so loud? I was unsettled, so I went downstairs to get a drink of water. On the way back from the kitchen, I smelt a strong aroma. The cigar smoke had returned. I headed into the front room. A figure was slowly materializing in front of my eyes. It was my late granddad. I was in shock. He told me not to travel to Aberdeen. He said bad things were about to happen, and then he vanished. I could not believe what I had just witnessed. My granddad's warning resonated with me, and 4 days later I found a job locally. When I got home from work one night, I watched the news. Something horrific had occurred, and an oil rig called Piper Alpha had exploded. A fatal maintenance mistake had released thousands of cubic gas into the atmosphere. The disaster had killed many crew on board. Many years ago, I was employed as a hygiene operative at County Halls in Leicester, England. My nephew was also working there, and we finished our shift at the same time. One evening we began our journey home when all of a sudden we heard a loud bang. We rushed to the nearby road and saw a badly damaged car facing the wrong way, stationary in the middle of the road. There was a mangled bicycle yards away on the opposite lane, its front wheels still spinning. And then I saw a body lying still. As I approached, I could see the body was in a bad way. A hand was still clutched tight to a mobile phone. I leant closer, then stood back with horror as I recognized the face of my ex-girlfriend. I stayed with her till the police and ambulance came, and as they lifted her dead body into the ambulance, I could have sworn for a few seconds I saw a ghostly double of herself standing by the vehicle doors, watching, before evaporating into thin air. For days and weeks later, I couldn't get the vision of my ex-girlfriend's body lying dead in the middle of the road out of my head. It haunted my thoughts day and night. To try and take my mind off things, my brother and a friend asked me to come along on a night fishing trip. As my brother and friend fished by the lake, I went off on my own taking photos with my camera. I was a keen photographer and found that it helped me relax. After a while, I headed back to where my friend and brother were fishing. The night was dark with a bright full moon, and there was a low mist hanging over the lake. I thought it would make a good photo and raised my camera to my eye, but as I did so, the ghostly figure of my ex-girlfriend suddenly appeared, standing in between my friend and brother. She was wearing the same red coat and blue jeans on the day of the accident. She turned her head and looked at me, pointing a raised finger. She then smiled softly and disappeared into the mist. That was the last time I saw the ghost of my ex-girlfriend. But weeks later, a smartly dressed gentleman knocked on my door. It was my ex-girlfriend's father. He had travelled from Russia to thank me for looking after his daughter. I told him it was a long way to travel just to thank me. He said yes, he felt compelled to, because he kept having a recurring dream. A dream of his daughter standing by a lake, pointing at a man holding a camera.